let's talk about this third way thing. I mean, this is something that I was going to save for Cliff, and we'll talk a little bit about with Cliff, obviously. But there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal by John Cowan, Jim Kessler, two third way. Well, they are supposedly associated with the Democratic Party, and they were and they are sort of not unlike the New Democrats or the DLC, the late DLC, more or less the same here. But they go on to attack people like Elizabeth Warren for calling for a raise in Social Security benefits. They argue that politically, this is not the way for Democrats to go, which, of course, is just simply a joke. There's not one data point to support any of their arguments. Social Security is Exhibit A of this populist political and economic fantasy. A growing cascade of baby boomers will be retiring in the coming years, and the Social Security formula increases their initial benefits faster than inflation. Now, I mean, I literally could pick out. I have their piece yellowed here. If you can see, are we actually streaming on YouTube? We are streaming on YouTube. And I literally just picked out one line and just landed upon just an absolute lie. This is their argument in favor of the chain CPI. The reality is that it makes no sense to measure inflation for the entire population when you're talking about people who are on Social Security, because people who are on Social Security are necessarily 65 years or older. And because they are 65 years or older, and they deal with a different set of costs than people who are younger than 65 years old, particularly when we talk about healthcare, their inflation is different. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been, for several years now, been calculating an experimental. They say experimental because it's not used in the context of anything that government actually does. It's just something that they record. Inflation rates for the elderly. So the reality is Social Security benefits, the cost of living increases, do not match the inflation that people on Social Security deal with. So that's just a bald-faced lie. They go on to say a growing cascade. Okay, they go on to say the problem is that since 2010, Social Security payouts to seniors have exceeded payroll taxes collected from workers. This imbalance widens until it devours the entire Social Security trust fund in 2031. So in other words, this is not going to be a problem until 2031. At that point, benefits would be slashed by about 23%. So their argument, of course, is cut Social Security now because it potentially, under very conservative estimates, will cut benefits in 20 some odd years if we do nothing. Senator Warren wants to increase benefits to all seniors, including billionaires, and to pay for them by increasing taxes on working people and their employers. Now, I don't know who the working people and their employers are, but her approach is to lift the cap on working people making over $110,000 a year. So, yes, they're working. They're also making a lot of money. They're also not being subjected to Social Security taxes in the way that they traditionally have been because we have such a strong income disparity. In other words, the middle's been hollowed out. The money's being hoarded at the high end. And so the amount of income that has been subject to the Social Security tax has gone down. Traditionally, it's at 91%. Right now, it's around 83%. Then they go on to lie about the disparity. It is the case that you actually, in many instances, pay more into Social Security or get about what you put into it. It is a social insurance program. That's what it's supposed to do. Then they go on to say that there's a coming Medicare crisis, which we know is the case. But then there's also a commensurate and larger health insurance crisis in the private insurance market. Because the reason why there is a looming Medicare crisis is because the cost of medicine is too high. Now, it is the case that in the past couple of years, we've seen a flattening of this cost curve. But we are still overpaying for medical treatment in this country by a factor of 2, probably. So understand that when people say there's a looming Medicare crisis, what they're saying is that we're not taking in enough taxes to pay for the medical costs that senior citizens are going to bear. This has nothing to do with Medicare per se. This has to do with the costs of medicine. So you could cut Medicare tomorrow. You'd have no Medicare looming crisis. And what you would have is an extraordinary rise in poverty amongst old people because they still have to pay for their medical expenses. It's just now they will do it through a far less efficient system called private insurance. Even with the Affordable Care Act's requirements that insurance companies now have to spend 80% of every dollar they take in on actual medical care as opposed to advertising, bonuses, marketing, Medicare still beats it by some 17%. So when you talk about a looming Medicare crisis, understand that simply means we're just not taking enough in taxes to pay for it, or we're not containing costs across the entire medical care delivery system. Because you get rid of Medicare tomorrow, and then you just have a medical crisis. But even that's not enough of an argument for them to make. 2030, a typical couple reaching the eligibility age of 65 will have paid in $180,000 in lifetime Medicare taxes, but will get back $664,000 worth of medical care. Well, of course, they're not talking about interest that accrues on that money as they pay into it. The disparity is there. It's about half of what they claim it is. But the bottom line is, the answer is not to cut Medicare payments because people are still going to need that medical care. They're still going to experience $664,000 worth of costs. That's just the reality. So we have to fix something, but it's not just to simply throw these people out onto the streets.
All I could tell you, Sam, is that was stunningly unserious. Everything you just said.
I know
it was profoundly unserious. But
listen to this.
Actually, really quick. I put up on the blog. Progressive Change Campaign Committee has a petition at Third Way to tell them to stop undermining Warren and
and Elizabeth Warren actually struck back in a very interesting way in a second. They go on to say, in the 1960s, the federal government spent $3 on such investments for every $1 on entitlements, social insurance. Today, the ratio is flipped. In 10 years, so the ratio is flipped. In 10 years, we'll spend $5 on 3 major entitlement programs, $1 on public investments. Now, I'm trying to think. 1960s. We know that Social Security started in the late 1930s. Yes, we had less retirees going into the program. That's A. We also had a baby boom somewhere around the late 1940s. 1940s to 1960s, those people would be 20 some odd years old. Now, they're going to be 65 and 70 and 75 years old. Yeah, so no shit, Sherlock. Now, I know that these people from the Third Way are not in any way arguing for more infrastructure spending. But the reality is, this is what our population needs from its government at this point and wants. That's the other thing. Social Security is incredibly popular. More popular maybe than anything, maybe even Santa Claus. I don't have the data on Santa Claus, but it's pretty close. So this is the garbage they've sent out because they're very concerned about what they're starting to see, I think, in the Democratic Party, or at least with some senators in the Democratic Senate. Li Fong, over at The Nation, digs into Third Way's annual report. The group relies on a peculiar D.C. consulting firm to raise $500,000 a year. Peck Madigan Jones Stewart. Peck Madigan is no ordinary nonprofit buck raiser. The group is in fact a corporate lobbying firm that represents Deutsche Bank, Intel, the Business Roundtable, Amogen, AT&T, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, MasterCard, New York Life Insurance, Pharma, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. In fact, Peck Madigan signs as a lobbyist for the government of New Zealand on the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Deal. Third Way, coincidentally, aggressively promotes the deal. Peck Madigan clients push for entitlement cuts, and so does Third Way. Humana, which gave the Third Way $25,000 as a donation, has listed Third Way not as a think tank, but as part of its yearly budget spent on lobbying activity. Fascinating. I wonder why that might be. Because for Humana, the Third Way is a lobbying firm, even if the Third Way doesn't call itself that. Third Way's leadership has tenuous connections to the Democratic Party it hopes to shape. Daniel Loeb, hedge fund manager listed as a trustee, bundled over $500,000 from Mitt Romney. Derek Kaufman, another board member, also gave to Romney.